Why are you even here at the university hospital? Mike sneered, his smirk filled with condescension. You don't actually think a doctor can fix being uneducated and poor, do you? His words were sharp, but I barely reacted, unimpressed by his arrogance. That's none of your concern, Mike. He leaned back, clearly amused with himself. Always so aloof, he remarked. But let's be real, no matter how prestigious the hospital is, they can't cure ignorance or poverty. I didn't even bother to fake a laugh at his feeble attempt at humor. Just as I opened my mouth to reply, a nurse rushed toward us, her face urgent. "Doctor, we have an emergency," she called, looking directly at me. "The patient is unconscious and in critical condition. Please come quickly." My name is Jessica. I'm the eldest of 4 siblings, and my life has been anything but easy. When I was in elementary school, our father passed away, leaving my mother to raise us alone. The debt he left behind made life incredibly hard for her, no matter how tirelessly she worked. At her request, I dropped out of high school to work at a local factory, determined to support my family and give my siblings the chance to chase their dreams without the weight of financial struggles. When I turned 18, everything changed. My supervisor, Mike, started inviting me to dinner. Over time, I developed feelings for him, and when he asked me to date him, I agreed. 2 years later, on my 20th birthday, he proposed. I said yes, and we got married. From the beginning, I was upfront with Mike about not finishing high school. He reassured me, saying, "Education doesn't matter when you love someone." At first, he treated me as an equal, never looking down on me despite being several years older. But over time, things changed. His attitude toward me shifted, becoming colder and more dismissive. "Do you even realize who's supporting your lifestyle?" he snapped one evening, his tone laced with irritation. "You should be more grateful." His words stung. When we got married, Mike insisted I quit my job to become a stay-at-home wife. I had planned to keep working, but he pushed, saying, "I want you to take care of the house. I expect a warm meal and a tidy home every day." Reluctantly, I agreed, even though it meant sending less money back to my family. Now, he saw me as nothing more than a burden. "I want to work again," I finally said one day, finding the courage to speak up. He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Do you really think anyone would hire a high school dropout like you? Your place is here, taking care of the house." His words cut deep. Had I made a mistake quitting my job? The allowance he gave me kept shrinking, and when I mentioned the lack of money, he'd blame me for poor budgeting. I stopped arguing and began dipping into the small savings I'd carefully built over the years. As I watched him sip his drink, lost in his own world, the thought of divorce began to creep into my mind. I was still young. I could leave this marriage, start fresh, and maybe even find someone who respected me. Mike, oblivious to my growing unhappiness, likely assumed I was just being selfish. Every attempt I made to talk to him ended in excuses. "I'm too tired," he'd say, or, "I've got plans." One evening, he even told me, "I don't want to waste my time talking to someone with such a low educational background." That was my breaking point. After dinner, while clearing the dishes, I made up my mind. I couldn't live like this anymore. With trembling hands and a dry throat, I approached him as he lounged on the couch, eyes glued to the TV. "Mike," I began, forcing my voice to stay steady, "we need to talk." He looked up, his expression indifferent. "What is it now?" The moment he spoke, it all came flooding back. "Mike." The arrogance in his voice and the smug expression on his face were unchanged, though the years had added a touch of weariness to his features. "Why are you here at the university hospital?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. You can't seriously think a doctor can fix being uneducated and poor." His words were as cutting as ever, but I barely reacted, unimpressed by his attempt to provoke me. "That's none of your concern, Mike. You're always so aloof," he continued, clearly enjoying himself. "But no matter how prestigious the hospital, they can't cure ignorance or poverty." I didn't even feign amusement at his weak jab. Before I could respond, a nurse suddenly approached us in a rush. She looked directly at me, urgency written all over her face. "Doctor, we have an emergency. The patient's unconscious and in critical condition. Please come quickly." For a moment, Mike froze, his smirk vanishing as her words registered. His eyes darted between me and the nurse, his disbelief evident. "Doctor?" he muttered, his voice dripping with incredulity. I didn't bother to address his shock. Turning to the nurse, I nodded. "I'll be right there," I said firmly, and without sparing Mike another glance, I walked away, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. 12 years had passed since I last saw him, and in that time, I had completely transformed my life. Back then, I was just a high school dropout, trapped in a toxic marriage with a man who belittled me at every turn. But those painful years had ignited a determination within me that couldn't be extinguished. When Mike demanded an absurd repayment of $333,000 for living expenses in exchange for a divorce, I had no choice but to walk away with nothing but my savings and my will to succeed. I took night classes to earn my high school diploma, worked tirelessly to save for college, and eventually enrolled in medical school. It wasn't easy. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and sacrifices, but I persevered. Now, standing in the halls of one of the country's most respected hospitals, I had achieved what once seemed impossible. I was no longer the girl Mike had ridiculed and dismissed. I was Dr. Jessica Moore, and my future was mine to command. As I rushed to tend to the emergency, I felt no anger or bitterness toward Mike, only pity. He was still clinging to his outdated notions, while I had built a life far beyond anything he could imagine. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I recognized him immediately, Mike, my ex-husband. He lounged in a chair in the hospital lobby, wearing a smug expression. "Jessica," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "why are you here at the university hospital? Don't tell me you think a doctor can fix being uneducated and poor." He chuckled, clearly enjoying his own insult. Unfazed, I met his gaze. "It's none of your business, Mike." "Always so cold," he sneered. "No matter how prestigious this place is, I doubt they can cure your lack of education or your poverty." Before I could respond, a nurse hurried toward me, waving. "Doctor, we have an emergency, an unconscious patient in critical condition. Please come immediately." I stood without hesitation, taking the lab coat she handed me. Mike's smirk froze as realization dawned. "I'm sorry about this, especially on your first day," the nurse added with a bow before hurrying off. Mike's eyes widened, his shock evident. I turned back to him briefly. "I'm a doctor," I said simply before walking away. After stabilizing the emergency patient, I headed to the consultation room to start my day. To my surprise, the first patient was Mike, sitting stiffly in the examination chair. His expression mirrored my own shock as our eyes met. The chart revealed he was here for heart issues, referred from another facility. Taking a steadying breath, I began the examination. Mike, visibly unsettled, couldn't hide his disdain. "Is there anything else you'd like to ask?" I inquired calmly after finishing. He stared at me, his voice dripping with disbelief. "How did someone like you, a high school dropout, become a doctor?" The nurse beside him glanced at him, startled by his rudeness. Ignoring his tone, I replied, "Just to clarify, I didn't drop out because of poor grades. My father was a doctor." and from a young age, I wanted to follow in his footsteps. Mike scoffed. But you couldn't afford college. My mother saved everything she could for me. I also earned scholarships, I explained. His smirk faltered. Scholarships? For you? I met his disbelief head-on. You used to call me a middle school dropout and mock my intelligence because you didn't know the whole story. That's on you. The nurse gently reminded us that time was running short. As I prepared for the next patient, I added, regarding the money you demanded I repay, I can pay it back now, double, even. My current income far exceeds yours. Mike's face flushed crimson, his pride visibly bruised. He stood abruptly, muttering under his breath. Just wait, you'll see. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Despite the encounter, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. Over the years, Mike's life had unraveled. His affair had ended in rejection, and the scandal around our divorce had ruined his career. Alcohol and cigarettes had worsened his health, leading to the heart issues now requiring major surgery. While I felt some sympathy for his situation, I couldn't forget how he had treated me. Yet, as his doctor, I remained professional, committed to providing him with the best care possible. Mike still comes for regular checkups. At one point, he even asked if I would consider remarrying him. I politely declined. Now, I'm content living with my family and focusing on my career. My work as a doctor is fulfilling, and I've built a stable, happy life. Occasionally, I reflect on my past marriage, but only with a sense of closure.